Dumelang, sanbonani. Ninjani, how are you? No, Spilile. Thank you for asking. So it is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to hold space with our sister friend Jessica. It's also a pleasure and a privilege to stand and, let me stand, really. To stand here. And I think I'd like to stand in honor of the women who came before us, the 1956 martyrs, warriors, the without whoms. And you know, they're dying away. I think only Aunt Sophie's still around. But the ones who are unnamed, unseen, unspoken, unremembered, unphotographed, unstatued, I would like to stand on their behalf. Yeah, let's all stand on their behalf. And I'd like us to take a moment. Just close your eyes and think about one woman, could be one, could be two, who brought you here. It can be somebody you've met. It can be a feminist ancestor, can be your mother, can be your grade 1 teacher. It can be a pastor. It can be a neighbor. It can be some woman you meet every day at the taxi rank who just says hello, no matter how terrible the weather is. But close your eyes and hold her for a moment. Think about what she's poured into you. And think about what you can pour forward. Let's open our eyes and shout out their name. Shout. And let's embrace the ones who are gone. Yes. Mamsobukwe, Wangari Maathai, Oles. And let's embrace ourselves because we're here. You know when they say, I'm not my ancestors, and some of the youngsters say, I'm not my ancestors, Zogmosha. And I say, I wish I was my ancestors. I wish I had half as much of their courage, of their resilience, of their courage under fire, of their strength of purpose, unresourced, untwittered, uninstagrammed, not for the gram, the silent histories, the invisible archives. Let us hold that. Let's take our seats.
Thank you.
So here we are, friends, comrades, colleagues, and we're here to really celebrate this fantastic book. Who's got the book? Good people, and they're more on sale at the back, and I don't want any of them in Jessica's bag. She needs to come and do shopping in Joburg. Relieve her of the books, please. But it's a really fantastic, it's a quick read and it's a wonderful read. And what I love about it, it's one of the things she says about it is that it's written in love and in fire. In love and in fire, and I'll ask her to say a bit more about that. She's defining our feminist praxis, and she's asking us, what is a liberatory cartography? And I was like, what does a map that takes us to freedom look like? What does that actually look like? And it talks about the rootedness in multiple traditions, an Africanist tradition, Pan-African traditions, Black feminist thought, anti-colonial thinking, and it's reworked to radically center African women's lives. It also talks about the idea of drawing on academia, on grassroots, and I'm really compelled by the idea of DMs and WhatsApps as part of archiving. Our conversations as part of archiving. Our long 3-hour lunches, I'm looking at you, Gail, as part of archiving. Our constant laughing dinners, I'm looking at you, Yaliwe, as part of archiving. This is archiving. The things that are held by our grandmothers, by our aunties, this is archiving. And I think the notion of democratizing and liberating thought is what holds this book so dearly. It also is the notion of courage. Courage not just as the heteronormative individual big man theory, but courage in community. The courage to co-think, co-dream, co-create, which is a feminist ethic of note. The notion of collective bravery. So it's not about the first past the post. It's about how we move over the line to liberatory freedoms and imaginations together. There are many themes which I think Sister Yvonne talked about, but I'll ask Jessica to also talk more about them. Kinship, courage, care, pleasure. Ooh, pleasure. And memory as well. Why these matters and why those themes as well. So my dear sister, take it away.
Jambo. Gosh, what a world we've created already in this space. And in a way, I think this is the point. I was walking in here and really feeling like this is basically a living bibliography in this room. There's so much knowledge and inspiration and analysis and commitment that we carry and that things that we have done. And so in a way, the book is just a conjuring. It was just an attempt to be, having been witness to and a part of many things on this continent, in the search for freedom, and having been also a dutiful student of many things that had happened before, I felt I actually had an obligation, if I could bear witness through writing, which is something I can do. I love to sing, only in the shower, but writing is something I can do. I felt I was obligated to actually bear witness through text. But as you say, I did try to bring everybody with me, and the citational praxis is something we can maybe talk about, but it was important. So firstly, just to say thank you so much. This is a very important room for me. I have people here literally who've known me since I was born. I have people who I went to school with. I have people who I've worked with. I have people who I've done activist interaction with. It's really something else to be held and to be in a dialogue, which I hope we will definitely do in this space. So, as I said, this book really just came out of a sense in a way of, it was sometimes there are things that you just need to do. It was sitting in my body for a really long time. And I actually left the job with the intention of giving myself a self-funded break to write. Then I had a baby and it didn't quite work out like that. But I just felt again that I had all these moments. I actually had a little notebook of all of these moments of things, and just magical little moments and spaces that really were indicative of the kind of things that we've done. And just a deep respect, for the level of just love that people have offered back, even at great risk to themselves. And I can see some people in this room at great risk to yourself, because you knew that you had to be in solidarity because there was nothing else but solidarity. And then because you knew you were that committed, again, to a freedom dream. So to me, that's the why of the book at its most basic level. So I mean, the love and fire. I mean, and also the other thing is that because I wrote it in love, I didn't actually want to go deep into the critique and the fights and what things we don't do very nicely to each other. Because I was like, you know what? Everybody does that. In fact, if you look at the leaders of the free world, right? Yeah. Right. Well, if you look at the types of official political governance and leadership we have in this world today, it's a joke. And again, if we held ourselves to that standard, we wouldn't be, pulling each other up for things. I actually think that we hold higher standards amongst ourselves, and that's why we're always critiquing each other, because actually our standard is higher. Our standard of ethics and integrity is actually higher. And we hold ourselves to a greater degree of excellence in our leadership. So it really is written in love, but trying to channel the fire of people who've really, carried this work for so long. It's intentionally fully regional, Pan-Africanist in this continent, and with its immediate siblings. I was just really aware, I absolutely give thanks to African American texts and to African American thinking and to thinking from other spaces. But I also felt like our knowledge produced from here is not as known. And is not well documented, and we don't share enough amongst, and we don't cite each other enough. And actually the contexts are slightly different. The material circumstances are different. There's elements of the history that are different. There's just different understandings, different conceptualizations. And so I also felt it was really important to have like the conceptual scaffolding of it be also from here. And that's why if you look at the bibliography, and then in order to do it, as you said, I of course went to, paywalled articles, which is basically where a good portion of formal written academic feminism resides from this continent, which is a problem because, again, if you can't pass the paywall, so I had some friends who were helping me. But the rest is in some of these spaces. So you'll see a lot of YouTube, there's like WhatsApp messages, songs, poetry, right? Because that is also part of our praxis, our action and intellectual thinking is encapsulated in all of those interventions. So anyway, I hope that is a good introduction, and I'm happy to keep going in the direction you think is good.
So the piece about citational references and the paywall and the controversies around the Neoliberal Academy and how it's a force more for exclusion rather than inclusivity, the ways in which it perhaps, it definitely upholds the kind of white supremacists, very patriarchal access to knowledge and information, but also the ideation and narrow view of who is the knower and who is not, who is the thinker and who is not. Yeah. I think, therefore, I am. That's just the whitest, most unprogressive thing, that's been oversighted. And you challenge that with what you say about Ubuntu. And there are many contestations, I know, in this country and in my own head, in the middle of the night, around the ways in which even Ubuntu as a construct has been co-opted, has been turned into this kind of very kumbaya, meaningless, de-radicalized, very depoliticized instrument, which is actually a way of, and then you get all kinds of people saying, where's your Ubuntu, when instead of citing and naming people's anger, and as this kind of a mollycoddling exercise. So I think it would be really interesting to see if you could say a bit about the intersection between your construction of Botu, personhood, Utu, and how that intersects with the African feminist cosmologies that you're really making such a tremendous contribution to.
Yeah. So, I mean, the praxis of transformation is inherently collectivist because we're here to free all of us, right? So Ubuntu is a way of understanding that. And what I did was I used Panashe Chigumadzi's explanation as the kind of basis for then thinking it through. And for her, she's saying that the idea is that I only exist because I'm constituted, my humanity comes alive in relationship to another. And that means that I have to acknowledge you in order to be alive, right? So it's not about me, it's about us. I come alive in the context of us. Actually, that is a very challenging idea because what it says is that then when you're confronted, right, with bodies and with communities that you feel distant from, disabled, queer, from another African country, from another space, whatever it is, you actually have to go through a process of acknowledging their humanity in order to remain human. So that means that our freedom praxis is about acknowledging the other constantly. And so what I try to look through in the book is to just speak about how actually, you know, the liberation projects, and I can read a bit of Freedom Nyamubaya's sort of, you know, thoughts about what liberation did as a fighter in the liberation war for Zimbabwe. You know, ostensibly sought to create something where we could all be, except it didn't. And the nation states were built on constitutions and on a whole body of law, much of which was derived from colonists who had their own issues and certainly their own deep exclusions. And but also interestingly then on normative frameworks that kind of suited the patriarchs of the day. Because, you know, people often when they talk about pre-colonial African, you know, feminisms or articulations of women's agency will reference women were kings, women were this, women were that, or whatever. Women were, you know, in market trade and, you know, had agency in all these different ways, and it's true. But what's very interesting is that guys are happy to decolonize everything except the patriarchy, right? And so actually the only reason that we can speak about common cause across the continent and the certain ways that, you know, gender is positioned across the continent is actually because of colonialism. It was written in the law, it was written through the economic policy, and unfortunately it was written in the religion. And so wherever that traces, you find very similar, you know, power dynamics. So the feminisms are constantly trying to push and say, but surely, yeah? All of us are welcome because all of us belong, and are constantly pushing to try to do that. HIV positive, right? Again, differently abled, you know, the whole universe of all of that is constantly trying to say we all belong. So also let's try to figure out amongst ourselves how we make that work, right? And then some of us might have to move a little bit to the side in order to allow resources, right, for others. But that's the only way we retain our humanity, is by ensuring that everybody belongs. But I wanted to read, because this liberation thing is very interesting. So I had the pleasure of co-facilitating the first Zimbabwe Feminist Forum in collaboration with the very beautiful, radiant and late Dr. Elaine Salo. And it was in that context that I met Freedom Nyamubaya, who's now also late, who had run away from home to join the liberation forces for Zim in Mozambique at age 14, 15. And then after the war, she, you know, raised questions actually about the way that the men comrades had treated the women, right, in the camps and in the struggle. And she wrote music, she danced, she was an incredible being. And so this kind of builds a little bit on some of her thoughts. So the latter half of the 20th century was meant to offer the African continent a renaissance. Organizing against European colonization and its direct epistemic and structural violences, Africa's liberation generation sought ostensibly to build communities and a geopolitical region that were agented, that were sovereign, that were free. Yet this liberation project has remained incomplete. As shared in the wisdom of the late Freedom Nyamubaya, poet and former combatant in the Zimbabwe African National Liberation Army, the insistence on seeking a liberated Africa in the masculine has left a gendered lacuna of potentiality. Liberation is a man, she reflects, after the disappointments of the struggle, but for a fuller emancipation, freedom is a woman. Indeed, it is significant, as I explore in the chapters on kinship and courage, that even when women attempted to play men's own game, asserting citizenship by engaging in nation building as armed combatants and agents of subversive anti-colonial struggle in communities, it did not lead to full recognition, either on the battlefield where many experienced sexual violation and belittlement from their own male comrades, or in the structures established to govern independent nations. In post-colonial states, the work of asserting full rights of women, and in more recent decades for non-binary people, has been slow, full of backlash and resistance, and reliant on the labor of oppressed constituencies themselves. And so, again, what I'm talking about in the book then is the actual African freedom project. Because the flag independence only gave us something. It didn't give us everything. So who's doing the work then of pushing that until we actually get freedom for all? And one of my arguments that African feminisms across this continent, and of course they're diverse and varied, but they share this, right, desire to keep pushing that project towards an actual freedom for all African people.
So against that backdrop, Jessica, of freedom thinking, can you say something about the notion of hope and radical hope? Radical hope and radical love as well. Because the Freedom Project is a love project. It is a project that's born from a deep sense of not even obligation, just adoration, a longing for something better, something more, the anticipation of birthing, of cocooning an emancipated space. And as you say, a sense of belonging for all of us and for carving that. And you write with a sense of urgency and a refusal to despair. And in these very, very interesting times, how do we maintain radical hope?
I mean, again, the book is a praise song in a way, you know. I just think like the hundreds of ways that people have intervened, you know, over time and consistently to try to flourish, even despite, you know, conditions that are almost unimaginable. In the chapter on care, I open it with a scene from a space that I was in Bukavu in Eastern Congo with a community of women who are survivors of the extreme sexual violence in the war, who are part of an initiative of Panzi Hospital. But they're in this field, they come from many different, you know, communities, they're together as survivors, they've reconstituted, they're in the process of reconstituting each other by harvesting, right, by tilling land, by harvesting, by mutual song, dance, and kind of a mutual care and recognition. Same for women who, you know, survivors of the genocide in Rwanda, of all the things that we've been through. And to me, there's something that's hard to name, but it's almost like a commitment to the life force, you know? It's like this deep commitment to the life force. And but also recognizing that life force, like I said before, is only brought alive and can only circulate between us. And so there's something about this care, like we do it together, we keep each other alive. And so for me, in the face of that, I think to have existential whatever, it's like, come on, just keep it moving, you know, like, if, you know, like, it's fine, it's not, you know, but like, you know, I think we can find these things that nourish us, and in a way the technologies are relatively simple. The technologies are relatively simple, you know, and we also have them in our many cultures. And so it's about just re-engaging those very simple technologies to keep each other alive. So to me, I just always say, like, I always feel like you have to humble yourself. You know, in activism, you always just have to stay humble and witness, again, the kind of the life force that people are willing to manifest. I know people call it resilience, etc. And, you know, and again, yeah, people shouldn't have to be struggling all the time. And I'm not, you know, it's not to romanticize that energy, but it's actually to acknowledge it. It's incredible. And it comes from a deep knowing, you know. And so for me, that's the thing. There are very urgent issues at hand. But like I said, to me, this is a praise song. Also a remembering that actually people have managed to say no. But also haven't stopped at that. And that's the thing. The liberation was maybe a no to some things. But the question is, what are we saying yes to? And that the yes is the cartography of liberation, right? When we define what it is we want in this world, when we define what it is we need, and when we define what it is we should have, right? And what we're willing to conjure and to work for, then that is the terrain that freedom happens in. So to me, I think that's what I was trying to explore, is that what have people done, how have people explored that, you know? And sometimes it's in little things, but that are actually very, very big, you know, in real terms, because of what it means. So again, just reminding us of what is possible, or what could be possible, or what we are owed in a way. simply for being alive and being human. We also owe dignity. And it's something that we can, like I said, we fight for each other, but it's also something we can manifest with intention.
It's beautiful. And the piece about care as being something really radical, we know that in the feminist tradition, our feminist ancestors like your Audre Lordes, who talked about care as part of radicalism. And in as much as I eschew, look, I'll take a half-price massage any day of the week. And if it's, if it's in the name of Women's Day, yeah, I'll take the nail, I'll take the manicure, I will. But I think, the concern is when that becomes the thing, depoliticized, denuded, erased, completely abstracted from. I think was it KFC a few years ago, one of their Women's Day branding tools was to have Mrs. Sanders as opposed to Ukenel. And this was, a big move towards the whole girl bossification. And in the era, I think we're living, thank God, in the era, I hope, of post-girl bossification. And all of that. Asabli vele, asabli docho. Right? But this whole idea of how care has almost firstly become a commodity. It's become something that is exclusive. It's become extracted from community, extracted from people who look like us. What the world has done to yoga is just a disgrace, really. It is. And Pilates, and for those who know, they know what somebody said about who should and shouldn't be doing Pilates. But when we think about it in the context of something that is so important for people who have been dehumanized as African women, as Black women, desexualized, unpersonized, completely, treated like objects. People who can have multiple children, who can pick cotton, who can walk many distances, who can care for other people's children whilst other people care for ours. And not think about that. It's okay for us to see our children once a year. And nobody thinks of that. In the context of that, the reclamation of care is nothing short of revolutionary. And I thank you for actually bringing us back into that frame as I mentally book my massage. But I would like us to pick up on something else. Sacred grounds and sacred belonging, and that's page 30. And I want to read something. It says, the tactical, passionate, extensive feminists have extended in helping African states rectify their exclusions and articulate Ubuntu in national and regional reimaginaries, inclusive of all of its subject, has been met with constant individual or collective insult of being un-African. This is an attempt to render African feminisms homeless, without local ground, a banishment whose symbolic significance must be understood from within the logic of community where kinship is foundational. Exhaustion with this profoundly unequal nationalist and state-building praxis has propelled ongoing African feminist organizing and imagination around the work of building a flourishing collective free of patriarchal limitation. And here feminists redraw boundary lines of communion in all domains. Can you tell us a bit more?
So I was really channeling Isabella Matambanadzo, who had made the statement that I include later, which says, African feminism has given us a sense of citizenship. And I don't mean that in the nationalist sense of coming from a nation state, but rather citizenship as being very much aware that we are daughters of this soil and that this soil belongs to us, not as an act of benevolence by governments or constitutions, but by a sacred process of belonging. And, you know, to just really think about, again, what does it mean to be here and to be a part, you know? The section on kinship, you know, I started thinking about kinship, and then I started realizing that actually this nation thing has done so many violences to us. And I look, for example, at, so I cover a lot of the legislative activism of African feminists in this section. And I look at how, for example, marital rape, the laws on marital rape have been some of the most hotly contested, and people trying to reform them, and the response from parliaments is always, but this is against our culture. You know, these women are coming to destroy African families, that African men have a right to their wives' bodies. And the irony is that that piece of law actually comes from colonial British common law, Sir Matthew Hale, right? Right? So, yeah, Sir Matthew Hale, right, who decided he wanted to be abusing his own wife, so he thought he might make it law so everybody else could do so as well, and wrote that into British common law. And it was only overturned actually in, I think it was the 1990s or so, and it was a bit shameful. Yeah, right, in the UK. But then still guys here are still vociferously defending it as some kind of African culture. So again, you see the ways that there's this selective rendering, right, of what is ours and what isn't. And to always say, African feminists are Western and whatever is just a way of trying to not engage the actual question at hand, which is, why are you not recognizing me as a human? That's the question. And I can ask it to you in any language you want. The question still stands. Why are you not treating me as a human being? Right? And so I think what's been beautiful about the feminisms is this attempt to just create another space where people can be human. And then to go through these activisms that, again, push against it. So we have the legal framework, so we have the economic resources, so we have the social imagination that allows us to be human, you know, and that allows that, recognizes that we have a fundamental right to belong, you know, regardless. And again, it's not given by anybody. It just is, because we do. So that's the thing, you know, and again, we have to contend with the state because we live in them, you know. It's a bit of a drag, but like, we live in them. They're not the only place we live, but we live in them. And just a quick thing to say about care, you know, one of the ways I like to think about transformation is that, because sometimes we end up arguing amongst ourselves about whether or not something is revolutionary or whatever. So the way I like to think about it is there's, in the simplest form, 3 levels of being, and to then use Swahili terms, so there's mtu, like the person, watu, the people, and utu, the kind of collective ethics, right, that structure us. And it kind of goes from there. It is fine to take care of the umtu. Like, it's okay to have a massage or do whatever it is you do to ground yourself in balance, you know, because you're also responsible for self and, you know, us. We can then also think, though, about what does that mean for community. So massages in particular are an interesting phenomenon because the way that they've been rolled out is completely economically inaccessible. One of my biggest dreams is, like, if I had all the money in the world, or maybe we had all the money in the world, one thing I would love to do with you is, if we agree, is to make spaces, you know, of like rest and just like enjoyment, you know. I was talking to the sister who does my hair, and she's like, you know, yeah, every time, you know, it's like I get a little money, I think, oh, maybe I should have a massage. And I'm like, but my mom needs, you know, or my mom needs money and I have to sort this out or whatever. So like, wouldn't it be beautiful, right, if we made it accessible? And so I talk actually about how the movement of women living with HIV was actually one of the foundational movements of care praxis. And what was beautiful was that the care praxis that was developed was accessible. It was things people could do easily. So it's like not massage with some jojoba oil that costs, I don't know, whatever. It's like literally just like take, you know what I mean? Like soybean or cooking oil, whatever's easy, mix it with some herbs that smell nice. And then they just taught that. And then you could do it with each other. And it wasn't with expensive. And it was like people sharing the actual knowledges, you know, or like different things that you could drink or take, or whatever, you know, like just to kind of rebalance yourself and come to peace. And to me, that is important to remember too, that there are these like grounded movements that are offering care praxis and offering spaces for people to reconstitute themselves, to reground, to regroup, and also to take care of their bodies. And I think that it's important when we trace the care tradition there, then I think it's possible to understand how the radicalism in it, you know? But again, then we think about how do we then, you know, expand it so that people have access. Same with pleasure. You know, we have to think about the structural conditions, right? We have to think about the structural conditions for the freedom to, for the choice, for the whatevers, right? If we don't do that, then it is actually kind of individualistic and not that revolutionary. But if we work on the structural conditions and the enabling, right, so that everybody is able to do, then I think it becomes something that is actually transformational.
So, about that, about good girls. There's a passage that you share here in the chapter on courage and governability. And it says, remember, be a good person, not a good girl. Good girls suffer. Good girls suffer a lot in this life. And it goes on to say, close quote, in modes and expressions of dissent, African feminisms show up on a spectrum from negotiation to outright rejection of the terms of debate. When the latter lies a tradition of insult as praxis, within the latter, lies a tradition of insult as praxis, drawn from the multiple lineage of women's defiance through breaking taboos and summoning shock as a last form of resistance. Because good girls hardly ever change the world. Oh, I said that.
Yeah, exactly. Is that the corner office? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's true though, you know, and I think like, you know, systems of dominating power maintain themselves by constraining us. And, you know, there's like a limit to how much you can do within the terms of reference of the dominating power. So again, there is always a limit, for example, to what legal activism can do, because it's still within the terms of reference of dominating power, or working from within an NGO, or whatever, right? Academia, but there's going to be a limit to that. And I think that what's interesting is that there are these like really strong traditions of this ungovernability. For me, what I enjoyed most about writing this book was the communing with spirits, but also just like we're super cheeky, you know, like people are really cheeky, you know, and like really maverick and interesting and like, you know, against the grain, like in these like kind of fabulous ways, you know, and to be able to kind of cite and just remember that across history and all these different environments, you know, people really unruly. And we also have that tradition. I think that part of the colonial framing was of this, like, you know, the bad girl and the good girl. And it was reinforced in, obviously, through colonial Christianity, but also in the law. So all of the laws around vagrancy, etc., were actually put in place to control migrant women in towns. And to control free movement, you know, and in fact it still functions in the same way now, where working class people in town are literally not allowed to stand and just gaze at the sky. You can be arrested, right? Especially in Anglophone and places that inherited that colonial law from the British. So this tradition of kind of unruliness is very interesting. So naked protests of insult, just literally, yeah. We have tiny humans here, otherwise I'd be swearing. But you know what I mean? So, And what's interesting too is it's interesting to see like which feminist ancestors different people pick. So if in a newer generation of African feminists, people are really enjoying that ungovernability, you know. And I think like pushing against again kind of the previous generation, probably my generation and older, that were a little bit became a bit, you know, stayed in how we interacted. And again, because we fell into respectability politics because we decided to engage institutions. And by engaging institutions from within or within the terms of the institutions, there's always going to be a bit of a trade-off. And one of those trade-offs is how you can actually fight back. And so you have to be measured and controlled and disciplined and respectable. The one thing I would say is that I think whenever we're thinking about our activisms, we have to think about them in ecosystems. Because one of the things that often upsets me is when people are like, look at that one though, oh my gosh, and distance themselves from the ungovernable ones. And I say, no, that is part of the ecosystem, right? It's actually part of the ecosystem. And in a way, your work is being enabled by them standing there and stripping off their clothing or shouting or whatever they're doing, right? Your work is actually enabled by that. Right? And so you have to respect that as a mode of interaction that's questioning power too. Yeah? And we actually have to think about how all of that fits into the story. So yeah, to me it's like I said, it's exciting. And actually I'll show you, but I had asked a fabric artist to make the book, images of the book into this kimono. So like they're all, and at the back I have Freedom Nyamubaya, Tandiswa Mazwai, and a young Biki Dude. And Biki Dude, you know, was this Zanzibari Tarab artist, and well into her, I mean, nobody knows how old she is, but she had come to one of the gatherings of the African Feminist Congress before that. I speak about it in the book. Hey, you know, so it was her and her homies, you know, they're like 95 or whatever. So her and her homies turn up, you know, with like a drum. They all have like a big drum on their shoulder. And they come and they light a fire and they're like warming the drum, you know, they're warming the skin, and then they start to drum. And the tradition that she comes from is a tradition of sexuality education and sexual pleasure education. And so they do it through the drum and through dance. And I mean, you should have seen it was serious business, guys. You know what I mean? And she was ancient. You know what I mean? And we were like, whoa! And she's like, look at all of you people. She's like, she's like, it's not, well, I don't know what's happened to you, but it's not happening. And to me, just that cheekiness and like the capacity, you know, I'm like, wait, this one is coming to steal your lover. Like, hey, never mind the 98 or whatever is going on. I'm like, it's just like, you're in trouble. So to me, it's that, right? It's like just channeling those legacies and capacities and ways of engaging with absolute irreverence. And like I said, it's also part of our tradition, you know, it's also part of our tradition. And I love that, you know, like I said, younger generation are really, really embracing that, you know, and kind of enjoy the cheekiness. And I think we need to, like I said, give it more space and to also give it due respect. I think it's as much of a contribution as the other ways that we intervene.
Also, what people call rebellion is a reclamation, because we've been evacuated from ourselves, essentially. We've been evacuated from our personhood, from our being. So what some people call cheeky is maybe us coming up for air and finally breathing, right? So on memory, maybe before we maybe bring in our friends here, I'd like to just read something that's by Lebohang Liepollo, and it says, "We're not afraid of remembering. Tell us what has been erased. We are not afraid of time. Tell us who we once were. We are not afraid of ourselves." So this chapter on memory is very resonant given some of the work I'm doing, and I would love us to dig a bit into that.
So I speak about memory as one of the more painful sides of African feminist praxis, and it's because we have never really been honored with the infrastructure of collective remembering, right? Like we're erased. So we're saying, for example, Women's Day has now become something that has no resemblance to the reason it was created, you know. And it was interesting, actually, in the airport, rather than buying Diary of a CEO, I got this book that, like, Jacana had done this, like, short editions of different, like, biographies of different things, and so I got the history of the ANC Women's League by Shireen Hassan, and it was interesting because she was actually talking about 1912 was the first organization against passes. I think it was in the Cape and Free State. So again, that movement brewed over many generations, actually, to get to 56, where they had 20,000 people. And again, to keep making the memory ample and drawing it out with multiple voices and multiple perspectives, because there's never only one reading of anything that happens. But again, I think that this is the piece of it. I mean, in a way, this was partly a memory-making exercise or just an offer to the archive. And I do talk about how, you know, my voice is only one amongst many, and I would always hope to be amongst a myriad, because I would always hope that there was more than one person defining the thing. It's not correct, actually, to have that. It has to be many people speaking to even the very same thing, so that we get all the different vantage points on it. But yeah, so I mean, there's all kinds of memory praxis. But to me, what was interesting was, you know, yes, we have made libraries, and, you know, again, everything we have is ephemeral. There's just never enough resources to have it be like some national museum that sits there and is fed in an archive of whatever, right? But we have tried our best, you know, and we keep trying our best to do things. But to me, there's so many other ways that we archive and remember. And so I speak a little bit about the reclamation of Winnie Mandela. Because to me, actually, to remember, I think I entered into a hotel room and put on Al Jazeera, and there was Lebo Mashile, like, because she had just passed. Lebo Mashile was like, no, no, you will not tell the story this way. I was like, wait, what's happening? And it just was like, wow, I remember following that and thinking, this is absolutely extraordinary. And so I write about it. Again, it's going to be impartial, it's going to be partial, and, you know, all of you will have your other takes on it. But to speak about how actually Black South African feminists managed to just completely turn that around. You know, to turn that around. It was a final refusal. It was like, no. No, actually, no. But that also, what was so interesting to me was this thing I speak about, the embodiment of the history. And again, I could be wrong, but my embodied reading of the thing was of Tandiswa channeling this spirit in that concert. Yeah? And in a way of the memory then, in a way being transmitted into the bodies of people who would hold it properly, right? So there's this thing of, like, literally just like the archive becoming us, right? And us embodying in our own flesh and in our spirits the memory of somebody as she passed. And so to me, there's so many ways that we carry these things, you know? And again, the book and the writing is, of course, not only, I mean, Africans have also had writing systems and story systems and everything, but it has become, in, you know, the knowledge economies we have now, kind of one of the only ways to remember. But I feel like we also have to just keep expanding out the photography, the film, the music, the song, the storytelling amongst ourselves, the naming of our children, you know, like all of those things that we do as a way of transmitting these memories of struggle. And I think, to me, it's the most fecund almost, because again, it's almost like the most defined by others, because not the other guys don't care, you know. So it's like they actually leave us alone, which is better, you know. So we actually have a space that we can define better for ourselves, and I think it's so juicy, to be honest with you, to be able to really think about how we lean into this and really do this, because we have to hold this as part of again, as part of what informs, you know, what we do. And there's so many incredible, you know, efforts at transformative imagination that have already happened. And if we carry that with us, we can just help it grow, you know. And so that, to me, is why memory was critical to have here. And to really, like I said, just try to think about the many different ways we do remember and have tried to carry these memories, and the way we weave them into what we have available to us.
And thank you. And the memory work, it's interesting. Horeme Madikizela Mandela was one of the most unknowable people. She was visibly unknowable. I was on the same Al Jazeera panel with Lebo, and I was on another one with Gail over there. And I think in a very short time, the thing that was so fascinating is that after 30 years of Mema Digizela being unwritten, miswritten, misremembered, and misknown, right? I think it took us like 7 days.
Exactly.
Literally 7 days to rewrite the archives. Yeah, give yourself a hand, Gail. To rewrite, she's done a lot of work, to rewrite those archives and to reframe the imagination and the levels of hostility. And what was really interesting, I was then on another panel with BBC where they wanted to take us down that dark alley about Bostompi, and I was like, we're not going there. You will go there alone, Sissy. I'm not going down that dark alley with you. And I think it also goes to show the power of what you've just said, how we then diffuse memory and the archive, singing ourselves into history, photographing ourselves. I mean, I know there's a lot to be said about selfie culture and Instagram culture, but there is something about saying I was there, saying I did that, saying you did that. Because if not you, who? Columbus? Rhodes? Vasco da Gama? If not who? Because our life, this world cannot take a vacuum. And our habit of retreating and being meek and not wanting to say and not wanting to be too much. Be too much, man. Because too much is never enough. It's actually never enough for the feminist project and for the liberation project. So I hope that that's a good note for us to point it back outwards. So brothers, sisters, comrades, colleagues, liberators, I'm gonna do something dangerous, which is just to pass a mic around. Questions, thoughts in South Africa, I know, I'm brave. Questions, thoughts, statements. My only request is please don't be a third panelist. That's the only request I have.